Hello, everyone. I am Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. Perpetual Chess is a weekly chess interview show where we talk with accomplished chess players, authors, and personalities about their lives, their careers, and how to improve at chess. Perpetual Chess is brought to you through the generosity of its Patreon and PayPal supporters and by Chessable.com. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have a guest I am really excited to talk to this week, just my kind of guest. He is an international master of chess who retired from competitive chess at the age of 23 in 1993. But before he did, he built quite a resume in the chess world and accumulated a lot of stories. In 1981, at the age of 11 years and 10 months, he became the youngest chess master in U.S. history. He had that record until 1994. He was the U.S. junior champion in 1988. And he parlayed that into tying for first in the U.S. championship in 1989 to 90. He tied with Roman Djindashvili and a certain Yasser Seirawan. But these days, he's an associate professor in the philosophy department at the University of Alabama. But luckily, he has not left the chess world behind. He is out with a book this year with New in Chess Publishing called The Best I Saw in Chess: Games, Stories, Instruction from an Alabama Prodigy who became U.S. champion. I read the book and I loved it, and I am excited to bring our guest in. So, Dr. and I am Stuart Rachels. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Ben.
You're welcome. And I should admit right off, listeners, we had a few technical issues, so we switched over to Skype from the podcast platform I've been using, but hopefully we won't have any more issues and we're good to go. Stu, sounds good to me. So with that out of the way, Stu, let's dive into the book. I loved it. And on our first take before the internet conspired against us, you were just starting to explain how this project came to fruition. Do you mind sharing that with our listeners?
Oh, not at all. But thank you first for reading the book. You know, when you write a book, it's a sort of a solitary experience, and it's such a joy for me now to have people actually reading it.
Yeah, and
I kind of backed into the project. At first, all I did was go into a closet and get some old shoe boxes with score sheets in them. Just wanted to remember some of my old games, and then I thought I'd write something up for a web page or something like that. And it just kept going and going. And 8 years later, I've got a book.
That's amazing. So at what point did you know it was going to be a book?
It was probably a year after I started. But I knew it was going to be a serious project when I had to get an assistant to look at the engines. I had to sort of learn about 21st century chess and just how incredible these computer programs were. And I thank Dave Gertler for doing a whole ton of computer work for me.
Yeah, I like a lot of your sort of tongue-in-cheek references to the engines that you check on all your old games. So as you did catch up with what has changed with technology in chess, what surprised you most, Stu?
Well, yeah, I went through this sort of grandpa experience of being amazed at sort of how good the machines were and how bad my own analysis was. But as soon as I got used to that, I really thought that the computers reveal the beauty of chess. When I stopped playing in 1993, it was just on the cusp of computers coming out and being good, and I thought it would be bad for the game. But I just found it wonderful looking at their analysis, and I always did the analysis first myself. So then when you see the things that you could not see, it's even more spectacular.
Yeah, and I know you've got tons of chess analysis in this book. For any listeners wondering, there's loads of diagrams, and the book is available, of course, in paper form. It's taken a while to make its way to the States, as a lot of New in Chess books have recently. But I read mine on Forward Chess, and it's also available on Kindle. But with regard to the many chess diagrams, game snippets, full games that are in the book, was there any one game that stood out in terms of a discovery you made from the engine?
Oh, well, there are a lot of those. I'll say that Dave Gertler was going through my games, the ones I thought maybe were worthy of publication, or parts of them were. And I was very anxious, very tense to get his results back. And I don't know if you've had the experience where there's several things that could be stressing you out and you don't know which it is until it resolves and you feel so much better.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one game that I played against Kyle Therrell when I was 11, and there was a really nice combination in this game. And as soon as the computer confirmed that the combination was sound,
right, that's funny.
I suddenly felt much better about everything.
Was that the one that you said may be the best game by an 11-year-old ever played?
Well, yeah, not very modest of me, but just at the time.
Okay.
Prodigies have been getting younger and stronger, and so I'm not comparing myself to more recent players.
Yeah, and in your defense, I will say you are quite modest in many points in the book, but that game is just a particular point of pride, and I was pretty impressed with it, I have to say.
Oh, thank you.
I still couldn't play a game like that. So, yeah.
No,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I don't think I could play another one, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, that makes me, that's what I was going to ask you is, so you took on this project and it's really, I commend you for spending so many years on it. The chess world is in debt to you for not just kind of mailing it in or doing a half-assed job. We're glad you took your time with it. But so you weren't that up on engines, but how up were you on chess generally when you got back into this project? Do you play Blitz on the internet? Are you following the big tournaments? What was your sort of day-to-day relationship like with chess after stepping away?
Right. I was briefly addicted to internet chess on the ICC in the early 2000s. But once I started caring a lot about my rating, I realized it wasn't very healthy. And all I had really done is just keep up with the very top tournaments, reading New in Chess and, just following the, Kramnik and Nunn, Carlsen events, that sort of thing.
Okay, so not necessarily reading on a day-to-day basis, but certainly when the World Championship comes around and stuff like that, you would be watching?
Well, in the top players generally.
Okay.
When Kasparov retired, I felt like a real loss because I love his game so much. And now there are, a bunch of players, a dozen players who are Kasparov-like. So there's lots of great chess at the top.
Yeah, and of course, you've got so many stories in this book, but getting to play Kasparov in simuls twice, chief among them. So we don't want to spoil all the content that you have, Stu, but could you tell us a little bit about those experiences? Oh,
yeah. There's nothing like being around Kasparov. It's sort of like being around what you would think of a rock star. There's, the hanger-ons and the drama and the film crew. And I played Kasparov twice in '83 when he was the candidate finalist when he was 20 years old, and then in '88 when he was 25 and was world champion. And both times, now these are just clock simuls, but in both events he sort of pitched a fit at one point. So that's part of those stories.
Yeah, not the only one to have such stories about Kasparov. He's an amazing player and seems to have mellowed out a little bit in his older years. But yeah, he was known. Not super unusual. And Stu, in addition to reading your book, last night I checked out American Gambit, the YouTube. Well, it was the film that you referenced that's available on YouTube in your book. Mm-hmm. That was really interesting.
Yeah, and for some reason I didn't watch that film for about 20 years after it was made. Partly because my experience in that simul, it was such a painful game for me because I was beating Kasparov at black, and then I got mated. But it was I really enjoyed that documentary.
Yeah. So for any listeners who aren't familiar, it is a documentary. Stu mentioned that he played Kasparov twice, and this was the second one. It was 6 top young American players, including Patrick Wolff and Alex Fishbein. and a few others, and they all played Kasparov in a clock simul, and it's really just an amazing slice of history. And it's for free, available on YouTube. Although I don't know if you had this experience too, but I had trouble finding the full version online, and I had a few audio issues. But I think I saw the whole thing. Did you find a? I know you. I noticed later you had a link to a YouTube. Did you find a clean version online, or were you kind of piecing it together as well when you watched?
What I found was good. It was just in 3 parts, so sort of 3 10-minute segments, but it was fine.
Okay, so I'll maybe I'll pull the link from your book and put it in the show description. I definitely recommend it for any interested listeners. And it was cool, the story you told in the book of Kasparov being relatively impressed with you from the first simul that you played.
Oh yeah, that's right. It didn't last too long, but I was pretty good when I was 14.
You're too modest. So. Again, I'm just curious how you contextualize this, because, I mean, being a philosophy professor, it's pretty distant from the chess world. So we get that you only kind of had one eye on the chess world since you retired. But how often do you reflect on your chess before you started writing this book? How often would you reflect on something like playing Kasparov, or, of course, you write about playing Anand and analyzing with Tony Miles and Norwood and, so many others that you cross paths with? How often do you think about all those amazing experiences?
All the time. It's sort of a mental habit. You've got a chessboard in your head. And one reason that I went to my closet to look at my score sheets is I was finding that whenever I would think about my games, it was always the same 5 or 6 games.
So which ones was it?
Oh, it would be my game against Kudrin in the '89 U.S. Championship, maybe the games against Kasparov. But I remember, most of my games. But if I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I'd sort of forgotten, the 100 other very interesting games I was in.
Yeah, and when you pull up these games, were you able at all to remember your thought processes? Were you able to piece that together as you look at these games from when you were, adolescent?
Absolutely. It was really striking to me just how many memories score sheets can elicit.
Wow.
I found myself right back in it. Now, I did have the habit that when I was analyzing without the computer, I would always look at the position from my opponent's point of view, because I thought that my eyes would be fresher and not just falling back into the way I was thinking during the game.
And did you find that to be helpful?
Oh, it was probably helpful. But again, the story with doing your own analysis and then having it checked is just the incredible rampage that the computer does to human analysis.
Yeah, I know that you're friendly with Andy Soltis, and I've had him on the show a couple of times. And one of the things we talked about is he wrote a column for Chess Life magazine, I think it was early this year, where he called it The Half-Life of Truth, just about the idea that, people have argued forever about like the objective soundness of some tall sacrifice or whatever it may be. And you just wonder at some point if it even matters anymore, whether if it was enough to scare your opponent, like, shouldn't that be enough, or does it matter if a move is really sound? What do you think, Stu?
Well, yeah, John Nunn wrote a column, or maybe it was a few pages from a book before the computers got good, and he said, suppose that we had computers, even if this is impossible, that it completely solved the game of chess. How would that really help us? What effect would that have on human play? And so there's a lot of that. The top players, they spend hours and hours a day, going through computer lines of openings, and so they're trying to do what they can do to make use of the computers. But the rest of us, it's more of a limited tool.
Okay, and so your friend that helps you with the engines, I'm sorry, remind me, I know you reference him in the book as well, but remind me.
Oh, sure. Name. Oh, Dave Gertler.
So did Dave actually show you how to operate one, or did you just totally keep that separate from your own analysis?
I totally kept it separate. I thought the book would be better if I tried to do the stuff myself, and then I could write from the point of view of having, my misconceptions corrected instead of just seeing the perfect line straight away. You're under some illusion with the computers that they give you a line and, it looks good and seems like something you might have thought of, but 95% of the time, you're not going to think of it. So Dave and I had this this procedure where basically I would send him my analysis. He would run it through Houdini or Stockfish, and then he would write back corrections, and I would then ask questions about them, and so it was kind of a give and take thing. And the thing that I thank Dave the most for was when I started on this project, I declared that I was not going to use engines because I thought it just took away the fun of doing the analysis. But then Dave took a complicated game of mine against John Fedorowicz and, showed me what Houdini had to say. And I realized that it would, be ridiculous not to use this resource.
Yeah, I think you settled on a good solution, because the books that are like strictly engine analysis, I do find them somewhat overwhelming at times, and honestly not all that helpful for my chess. So to me, I think it's a good approach to actually share what you're thinking, but just make sure you don't have any like egregious wrong analysis in there.
No, I mean, when I look at Kasparov, my Great Predecessor books, I think, is there any human being who's been through 10% of this analysis?
Yeah, it's a bit much in my opinion. I mean, I love the historical context in those books, but yeah, the variations are just too deep, and especially from Kasparov himself, like he practically is an engine. So it would be plenty if he just wrote his own thoughts, Yeah,
or wrote his own book and then used the computer to do corrections.
Yeah.
One of my favorite writers is Yasser Seirawan, but I wish Yasser would write a book using the engines. That would be really great.
Okay. Yeah. And you've got some fun Yasser stories in there. Would you like to share one or two? Yasser is always a fan favorite, as you're probably aware.
Oh, yeah. Yasser is a delightful person to be around. Do you have any, I don't know, there are a whole bunch of Yasser.
I mean, okay.
stories.
I loved the one you told about what he told you about Fischer.
Oh, right. So this was after Fischer's rematch with Spassky in 1992, and Stefan, is that right? Forgive me, but this was stories he was telling at the U.S. Championship after he'd met Fischer, and the thing is, none of us had ever been around Fischer. You have to be pretty old at that point. And, of course, we all knew, tons of Fischer stories and how, Fischer seems to have some psychoses and some real pronounced bees in his bonnet. And Yasser got along with Fischer very well. And he said, Bobby is absolutely sane. There are just 4 topics you have to avoid with him. Avoid these topics, and he's absolutely sane. First of all, the world championship title. He still thinks he's world champion. Second, the Jews. He hates the Jews. Third, the Russians. He hates the Russians. And fourth, Time Warner.
Right.
Just those 4 subjects. Avoid those 4 subjects. He's completely sane.
It's so
and
funny.
So we just thought the Time Warner thing. I mean, there's a story behind it. John Donaldson was telling me, but it just seemed to come out of nowhere.
Yeah. John Donaldson, of course, also has been on the show and told a lot of great Fischer stories, being one of the leading Fischer historians. But yeah, that was very funny, and you have a lot of color on Yasser himself, his personality as well. So I mean, there's so many stories in the book, but just to pick your brain a little bit more, Stu. So what are your most cherished memories in terms of your brushes with all of these chess legends?
Oh gosh. I'll just say one thing generally. You mentioned that I took a good long time to write the book. I do think in a book like this, your first duty as an author has to be to the reader. You know, if there was something that I felt sort of awkward about putting in or something like this, I just put it in. You know, I was trying not to, shortchange the reader by, omitting names or that sort of thing. For example, there's a section where I go sort of through legends that I knew.
My favorite section, Najdorf. Of course, yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. And there's only one player that I just had nothing but bad things to say about. That was Reshevsky. And the thing is, when I think back about all that I've read about Reshevsky, I can piece together that sort of nobody liked him, that he's a very unpleasant fellow. But for some reason, no one will just say that outright. They'll tell some story about, he's playing Robert Byrne, and they're both in time trouble, and Byrne's flag falls, and Reshevsky's wife stands up in the audience and says, "I claim the game on behalf of my husband." or you'll have Kotov talking about how Reshevsky was in time pressure and making these ridiculous little jumps in his chair. But anyway, I guess being out of the chess culture, it makes it easier for me just to be blunt about things. Now, you've asked me what my favorite memories are, so I'm telling you, like, the worst memories.
Right.
Being around Sam Reshevsky. Gosh, all the time I spent around Najdorf, Spassky, Kasparov. I'll retell one story from the book that I was pleased with, just because I got a big laugh, and it was like all the top U.S. players were in the room, and so was Tony Miles, because he'd rented a post office box in New York City
right.
in order to meet the residency requirement for the U.S. Championship. And this was at the Interzonal in 1990. And Yasser Seirawan had just defeated Karpov in a game in Sweden. And in 1990, beating Kasparov or Karpov was so rare that just to win one game from them was a cause of celebration. And so we were kind of gathered around in this hotel room, and Yasser was talking about beating Karpov, and he said, and someone said, "Well, how was Karpov's sportsmanship after the game?" And Yasser said, "Oh, he was very nice. He sat at the board. He kept analyzing with me for a long time." And Tony Miles was probably the only other person in the room who had won an individual game off of Karpov. And Miles said, I don't remember Karpov being gracious when he lost to me. And I then piped up and said, "Well, Tony, Yasser didn't beat Karpov with one A6.
Right. Yeah, Tony.
So, yeah, everyone, Tony got a real pleasure thinking about that. Now, at the time, everyone would have known this game because, Karpov-Miles, E4, A6, D4, B5, and Karpov loses with white against this.
It is amazing, and of course now Magnus is kind of the only one who will play these sort of whimsical lines, which is it's not quite the same when you are the world champion playing it in a online rapid game as opposed to playing it against a former world champion when you get your shot to play him as a non-world champion grandmaster.
Well, I must say, Magnus plays these stupid openings really beautifully. Like watching him, he really understands things about these bad openings that other people don't. And of course, half of Magnus's strategy in chess is just to get the other player, out of book, out of theory, so he can then outplay them.
Yeah, it's something to behold. So, Stu, we'll get to the questions from Patreon supporters of the podcast in a minute, but what you just mentioned about Magnus made me think of a question from your friend Ben Finegold. So he's been on the show a couple times, and So I messaged him when you were coming on, and he's got a few questions for you too. But one of them is I asked him for some funny stories, but he didn't deliver. He kept it more philosophical in nature in terms of the questions. But one of them was who do you think is a better player, Magnus or Kasparov?
Well, I do agree with what Andy Soltis said, that if they were playing each other, then Kasparov would win 1985 chess and Magnus would win 2020 chess. I mean, Kasparov's openings were so fantastic, but now, all the players have got the engines and, they're crunching this all the time. I will say, when you compare players from different eras, it's very important how people match up against their peers, because, chess players get better. Like, each generation is a little better than the last. And, just you sort of build on chess understanding over time. And Kasparov was more dominant over his peers than Magnus is. It doesn't mean he plays better. I can't do any better than the rating system. And if, Magnus has been in the 2880s and Kasparov in the 2850s, well, I guess Magnus is a tiny bit better, but I certainly wouldn't be able to tell that looking at their games.
Yeah, it's a tough call. Yeah, their ratings, I agree, it doesn't do much justice. I mean, some people have suggested that the best way to judge is by comparing them to their peers, but even that's a little tricky because both of them seem to always retain the world championship, but do so narrowly. It's not like Kasparov. He always managed to beat Karpov, but they were so close. Their lifetime score is so close.
Yeah. There was a big drop off between Karpov and then players 3 through 10 in the world. And then, by the way, something that Ben Finegold put very well once is when you look at someone like Morphy, who probably dominated his peers more than any chess player ever has, there was just so few players then. So little was known that, again, it's like you want to compare to one's peers, but also have some measure of how many peers one had.
Yeah, it's a good point, and we'll never really know the answer. So when I reached out to Ben, the first thing he said was that he knew you, he's known you longer than I've been alive, which I think gave me too much credit, because I was born in 1977. I'm 43, so you guys didn't know each other when you were 8, did you, Stu?
No, we were 12, I think, when we met.
Okay, yeah, so he probably thought I was younger than I am, which would be nice. But I would like to flip it, since I asked Ben about you. And Finegold, of course, as I'm sure you're well aware, is quite popular in the chess world. Everyone has come to appreciate his humor. So do you have any crazy Finegold stories you could share with us?
Yeah, I will, actually. I'll share one with you that was not in my book. By the way, did you hear that Howard Stern recently said that Ben was like eternally entertaining or something like that?
That's amazing. I know that Dan Heisman taught Howard Stern for a while, and he's got quite an affinity for chess, but that's quite a shout out that Ben got.
Okay. So here's my Ben story that's not in the book. So Ben is he's naturally very muscular, right? He and I are exactly the same age, but for me to want to, arm wrestle with him or play a game of Mercy or something, the guy is very, very naturally muscular. And once Ben said to me, we were about 16 years old, Ben said to me, okay, punch me in the stomach as hard as you can. And I gave him a tap. And he said, no, harder, really do it. And, I hit him a little harder in the stomach, still it's, hurting my fist more than it's hurting his midsection. And Ben again said, no, I really want you to do it. Okay. So I said to him, Ben, you really want me to hit you in the stomach as hard as I possibly can? He said, yeah, do it. I said, no, Ben, I'm really going to do it. Are you really sure that you want this? Yeah, do it. So I mean, I probably only weighed, 140 pounds at the time, but, I'm a male. I've got some muscle mass somewhere in my body. So I threw my arm back, kind of like a baseball pitcher. I got my whole sort of body into it, and I hit him as hard as I possibly could in my stomach. And he walked away shortly after that. But about a half an hour later, I was sitting there at my game, and he was walking by, and he had both hands sort of on his stomach and this real sort of sickly look on his face. And I got up, and he said, "You really hit me hard." I said, "I'm sorry, Ben, you asked me to. That really hurt."
It's funny. So it's good to hear that he's human. Yeah, I mean, mentioning how strong he is, I just remember watching him play 1 minute chess. I mean, he's like, there's like a physicality to how fast he would move the pieces in this not online play.
Oh, absolutely. He and I and Vivek Rao and Jim Rizzitano, Patrick Wolff, we had great 1 minute sessions, but I think Ben was just slightly the fastest. Really incredible speed. Once we were playing with a Caixa clock. This was the only digital clock that existed at the time. And Ben and I played 60-something moves in a 1 minute game. Maybe that's not unusual, but we were able to check it with the clock afterwards.
Yeah, everything gets colored now by everyone playing 1 minute online, where you can easily have 100-move games. But yeah, I mean, in those days, and I think, I don't know, it might be more common now for the clocks to not tick down when you hit them. Whereas before, I think that, that was not easy. And yeah, I was wondering immediately, my mind went to like, if you were using one of those Gertler clocks or whatever to play 1 minute, because they didn't withstand a beating very well.
No, they didn't. There was only one time that Yasser played 1 minute with us. He's several years older than we were. But afterwards, we called them Seirawan rules because we'd never heard this before. Yasser said, "I'll play 1 minute with you under the following conditions. First, has to be touch move. Second, if you knock a piece over on the board and hit the clock, you lose. You forfeit immediately."
Wow.
And I can't remember the third rule.
Yeah, I mean, more customarily, you just have to fix the piece. But
if you move before your opponents hit the clock, then you lose.
Oh, okay.
That was the third. Yeah. Samuel Reshevsky would make a move and then hit his opponent's side of the clock just to get the opponent to move and forfeit it under those rules. But I didn't do that.
Okay. Another unflattering story of Reshevsky.
Oh, and that was undeserved, that one.
Okay. So Stu, I want to segue to talk about your decision to retire, because we have a few Patreon questions from that. But first, we're going to take a break to hear from our friends at Chessable. If you're enjoying hearing some chess history from I am Stuart Rachels, then Chessable.com has some good news for you. My Great Predecessors Part 5 by GM Garry Kasparov is finally on Chessable. This one covers strictly GM Viktor Korchnoi and legendary former world champion GM Anatoly Karpov, Kasparov's main rival, of course. There's great historical context. Of course, as Stuart and I discussed in this interview, there's tons of variations, but that makes it all the more important that you have a way to play through the moves without just using a chess set, and Chessable.com has you covered there. It's on sale through July 19th, so go to Chessable.com and check it out. So Stu, you've got so many amazing stories in this book, and your enthusiasm for chess, your love for chess really shines through, and you even say at the beginning that you love chess, and explicitly in the first chapter or the preface. But you walked away. And in fact, Mike Klein, another friend of mine who wrote a profile of you in 2008 for Chess Life magazine, actually pointed me. You mentioned Vivek Rao. He profiled you, Vivek Rao, and GM Tal Shaked, who's another grandmaster who walked away. And you mentioned in that article that you felt like, or that your trainer, Boris Kogan, said at some point that maybe you didn't love chess enough. So, and I know that the chess world was different then, but how do you sort of square that? Like, what was your principal reason for retiring? And was it strictly business, or was it more of a from the heart decision?
Well, yeah, to explain Boris's comment, he said, your problem is you don't love chess. And, I was, 22 years old when I heard this, and I was just sort of embarrassed. But what he was really talking about was I didn't like studying openings. And if you don't like studying openings, then the life of a chess professional is not for you. It's a hard life being a chess professional. And one thing that breaks my heart is that my impression is if you're not one of the top 10, 15 players, it's very hard to make a living. And, you've got these players, I don't know, maybe Shirov is one now. They're still just extraordinarily good, but they've dropped off, that list of, the top 15. And so, they're just, slugging it out and, Swisses in Europe and, finding students. And it's, it asks a lot of a person and is not rewarding to many people other than the world champion.
Yeah. And one thing in watching American Gambit, that really hearing even Patrick Wolff, who of course has gone on to be quite successful in the financial world, he had, I felt like a pretty mature perspective about it when they interviewed him during that. And that got me remembering, I mean, it's still the case now, what you say, that if you're trying to make a living just from playing and you're not in the top 20, you're basically probably won't even be able to support yourself. But it was even more stark then. I mean, I remember grandmasters just often were penniless. So was it even a hard decision for you at that time?
It wasn't hard because I fell in love with the study of philosophy. And so I kind of moved on to that. Now, in the one thing that I envy about the chess world as compared to the professional world that I was in the world of professors, is that professors don't have ratings.
Yeah. And
so therefore, everyone thinks that they're, a strong grandmaster. There's no checking of the egos. In chess, you really don't have to have an ego. You have a rating, and so that's how good you are.
Yeah, a true meritocracy. One increasingly rare. So we've got two related questions from the Patreon mailbag. I think that your story, Stu, really struck a chord with people because, I mean, I think for people like myself, to be that good at chess is just a dream. So I certainly understand your decision, but a lot of people, I think, just are looking for even a little more color. So we'll start with one from friend of the show, Jan Peter Schmidt. And Jan actually has a few questions embedded in here, and they're tough questions, but I did send them to you in advance. So be curious to hear your answer. So Jan says, if your chess career had taken place in this era with the internet boom and mega sponsors like Rex Singfeld, would you have opted for a career as a professional chess player or still decided to become a philosopher? Number two, I love this one, for which spot on your chess ranking list would you be willing to exchange your successful academic career, e.g. top 10, top 20, top 5? And three, comparing the career of a chess professional and university academic, what do you envy chess professionals for? Which you just answered a little bit. What makes you happy about your job that you would miss as a chess professional?
Yeah, those are very tough questions. And yeah, I don't want to... Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, Jan should host this podcast. They're amazing questions.
Yeah, I don't mean to shirk them. The question of how good I would have to be to give up my other career, in a way, I don't know the answer to that myself. It would just have to have arisen. I would have learned that about myself if I'd gotten better. When I played in the Interzonal in 1990, it was an easy decision to play in it because it was in the summer, so I didn't have to miss school. And I remember thinking, okay, if I made the candidates matches, then I would take a year off of school. Like that would do it. And if I'd been as good as Komsky or Anand or these kind of guys, and I had been successful and gotten into candidates matches, maybe I would have become a professional player. But I do want to emphasize something I said a few minutes ago, which is I just did not want to study openings for hours every day. And I can brag all I want about my talent and that sort of thing, but to get to the top 20 in the world, you've really got to work your butt off.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, in the engine age, the nature of studying openings has changed a little bit, but the glaring need for memorization certainly hasn't. Was that your objection to it, just having to memorize these reams of analysis?
Well, it wouldn't be so much memorization, because at sort of the level I got to, you're looking at a lot of middle games, you're trying to improve on things. There were just a lot of things I learned about chess, but opening study was not one of them.
Yeah. And what makes you happy about your job that you would miss as a chess professional? Your current job?
Sure. I guess the stability of it. Having colleagues that you see during the week. The nice thing about being a chess professional is you have such freedom of how you use your time, but it's a little structure is probably a healthy thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you look at someone like your friend Ben Finegold, who of course has had his lived in various places and had varying degrees of success working as a chess professional, primarily these days doing streaming and stuff like that, but also giving a lot of lectures and doing classes and lessons.
And he's got a great club in Atlanta.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say he's doing great right now, but that hasn't always been the case. How does a life like that, which would probably, I think you peaked around number 150 in the world, is that right?
Yeah, a generous assessment is 150. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take it. So how would a life like that be for you? Like, would you enjoy, obviously you're a teacher as it is. So would you enjoy teaching chess and doing the sort of presentation that Ben and many others are doing these days?
Well, Ben has a love for chess. Kind of like a starving artist kind of situation. It's what he wants to do all the time, and so he can have a good life doing that. In terms of teaching chess, this is maybe a little too harsh, but I remember Larry Christensen once saying, "I wouldn't mind teaching chess, but frankly, I'd rather work at the car wash."
Wow.
Yeah. So, teaching is really very different from playing. And sorry, Ben, I'm rambling a little bit. This is, I'm 50, right? Got to give me a break.
No, you're doing great.
But you might say, like, I spent the first 20 years of my life, learning how to play chess, and then the next 20 learning how to write. And so I think being a chess author is probably the best thing for me now. So, I like working on puzzles too. I've had some puzzles on ChessBase, and I have 1,000 puzzles in my file that no one has seen. But anyway.
Wow. So are you creating studies, or how do the puzzles? How do you make them?
Yeah, they're not as good as like your studies by Troitsky or Kasparian. These really fantastic studies. But I had this idea to take each chess move, and there's, 835 or something like that, distinguishable moves in algebraic notation. If you don't, sorry about the technicality of this, if you don't differentiate based on file or rank, like rook A D1, knight 3 to E4. And so I set about trying to find the fastest game that could end with checkmate in each of those moves. Oh, it's 840. Yeah, so I actually have files with 840 problems. And a computer expert in Canada named Francois Lebel looked at all the chess games up to 7 moves for each side. And so he found all the checkmates that were available in those sort of 14 ply. This is someone who ran his computers for months.
Wow.
Anyway, that's just an aside. I think players will be more interested in my book than in my strange problems.
It's fun though. I mean, it shows your enthusiasm. You know, there's still an allure to the mystery of chess that demonstrates.
Oh, I think problem composition is just amazing. I just can't believe what people have come up with.
Yeah, it is. It is something. So we've got another question relating to your retirement, Stu, and this one also I think is quite a good question. So it's from supporter of the podcast, Aaron Holloway Nahum. And it's, I'll just go ahead and read it. He says, "Thanks so much for the book, Stuart. I hugely enjoyed the games and learned a lot. In researching your career, but I was particularly struck to see you retired with 2 GM norms. To an outsider, it seems like such a precipice to finish on. As philosopher chess player, you may already be aware of, in a recent article, GM Jonathan Rowson wrote on the subtle joys of underachievement, where he writes, and this is in quotes from GM Rowson, "But I did not fulfill my chess potential, and it still hurts to think that. I cannot shake the notion that if I could have climbed higher in the status charts, perhaps even top 50, and rarely does a day go by when I don't briefly think about that unlived life. There are limits, though. I knew I could not go all the way to the summit. In the games against world champions and their contenders, my inferiority was palpable. They had consistently better and quicker judgment, and more fundamentally, none of my doubts about playing chess as a worthwhile way of life. So my regret is suffused with relief. I might have climbed a little higher, yes, but I could so easily have squandered my life as a hungry ghost, hostage by 32 pieces and 64 squares forever." And then unquote, and then Aaron says, "The one thing I miss from the book and I'd like to hear about are those last games and days. How did you make the decision to retire? And did you think about, and not to harp on it, but with 2 GM norms, and did you think about going back?"
Yeah, there's quite a lot of good questions in there. One thing, I played a good bit of Blitz with Anand, and once you've done that, you realize you will never be world champion. Yeah, he's touched by God, as my friend Andrew Metrick said. My decision to quit chess was kind of like my decision to write this book, which is I never made such a decision. When I played in my last chess event, I didn't think of it as my last chess event. But by that point, I was in graduate school, and I was just immersed in something else. My one, I don't know, regret is not quite the word, because I don't regret any of my decisions, but I really wish I'd become a grandmaster.
Yeah.
And about half the time that people refer to me, they call me a grandmaster, which is nice in a way, but it's also...
Yeah, I had to double check it. Yeah. When I first saw that your book was coming out, of course, I remember you from the Chess Life cover. I was, as Finegold pointed out, I was a kid then, and I was sure you were a grandmaster. I had to look again.
Yeah. Well, I will say I'm one norm short, but it would be a very difficult norm to get. For one thing, I was a very consistent player, and so I didn't have many disasters, and I didn't have many triumphs. And, you need quite a triumph to get a GM norm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although, I mean, obviously, I think if you had continued to play at, in your early 20s, it would have just been a formality. But yeah, now it might be a higher hurdle. Although, I don't know how those Blitz games on ICC went. I don't know what your current chess strength is. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, I just also say I had very few norm opportunities when I played. There was really not much in the United States for someone to do to get norms.
Yeah, that's not to be underestimated. Now, with St. Louis's invitationals and the Charlotte Chess Club's invitationals, it's a little more possible. Also, travel is not as expensive as it used to be. So yeah, that presents more opportunities for sure. So it's surprising to me that it wasn't sort of a conscious decision to retire. So were you ever close to coming? Did you ever almost play in another tournament in the subsequent years?
No, it's for several years I was working on a PhD in philosophy and really loving that. And then once you're out of the culture, it's there's a real divide there. It'd be a very big step for me to play in something. And I'll mention one thing. This is a little embarrassing to admit, but if I played again, I don't think that I would put my classical rating at risk, because I'm not a grandmaster, but I am over 2,600, and so that's just a little point of pride for me. And of course, I'm 2,605. It would be easy as can be to lose 6 points in an event shaking off the rust.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's I would like to stay over 2,600 as well. So being that you've kind of pushed aside the internet blitz, when's the last time you played a chess game, like even a casual blitz game?
Well, I have actually played on the internet pretty recently. I've got a friend, a talented player named Joel Friedman in Huntsville, Alabama, and it was his birthday, so we played a bunch of blitz games. If I had a friend, just in my hometown, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, who was a grandmaster, I'd probably play blitz all the time. But my last, what you would call an event, was just 1998, a blitz event when these things were unrated, and I beat Judith Polgar and would have won the tournament if Max Delugi hadn't won every single game.
Yeah, strong blitz player.
So I still think of myself as not bad at blitz.
Glad to hear. And that hearing you talk about playing, obviously you sort of express an affinity for in-person, board and pieces blitz as opposed to online. And that made me think of the story you told of driving to St. Louis in 2017 when Kasparov came out of retirement. So, and you kind of poignantly mentioned that even though you made an impression on him when you were a kid, he didn't necessarily recognize you or acknowledge you, and that's not really what you were looking for. But what was the overall experience like of seeing this chess world, seeing this beautiful chess club, and I'm sure you ran into some people you knew. What was that trip like, Stu?
It was a great pleasure. I hadn't seen Anand in 20 years, over 20 years. And at the time I had a beard, which I usually don't have. And Anand was giving an interview after this event was over, and he'd done well in the event, and I was sort of waiting outside for him to come out and sort of see if he recognized me. And he came out and he looked at me, and in about 1 second he said, "Oh, Stuart, how are you? I'm sorry, it took me a long time to recognize you."
Yeah, it's a perfect Anand story.
Yeah. When your brain works that quickly, I guess a second or two is a long time.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I was just going to say there've been a lot of sort of similar stories of the computer-like brain of Anand and him remembering some event. He played some kid in a simul and he remembers him. I think it was GM Michael Brown who told that story. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I like those stories. You have to be a little skeptical of them. Not that the things that are said aren't true, but I mean, Anand or anyone else might remember a few games, that they played in, 1981. but most of them they would have forgotten, like everyone else. I think the best story of chess players' memories I've ever heard that was a first-hand story was, I believe Alan Kaufman told me this, of Chess in the Schools, that before Fischer's match with Spassky, he had this book that was just called The Red Book. It was a book of Spassky's games. It was in Russian, and there were several hundred games in it. And you could tell Fischer any number from 1 to 450, or however many games there were, and then he could tell you the entire game.
Man, yeah. Nothing surprises me with Fischer stories, but that's crazy.
Yeah, that's a good one. And of course, he knew all the analysis in the book, which wasn't too much analysis, and then his own improved analysis. So, when Fischer's openings were in trouble early in his match with Spassky, so he just started playing everything. And of course, he didn't have to wonder, what Spassky would do against the, Alekhine's defense or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm actually reading my 60 most memorable games. My 60 memorable games. I always call them my most memorable right now. Yeah, and it's similar to what we were talking about earlier. I occasionally turn the engine on when I'm looking at the games, and not everything holds up, but there's still just a sparkle to the games that's something to behold.
Well, I think Fischer's analysis holds up really extraordinarily well. In Kasparov's book on Fischer, I just noticed he didn't have a lot of corrections of Fischer's analysis. And, I stopped being self-conscious about the computers correcting me when I read the story that when Smyslov was old, and, Smyslov, may be the greatest in-game player in chess history, he was in despair at the, early Fritz program, where he had put a game against, in-game he played against Seirawan, and Smyslov considered it one of his best in-games, and the computer just ripped it to shreds.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, basically, if my 60 memorable games is not just full of errors, it shows that Fischer was an incredibly wonderful analyst.
Yeah, no surprise. And that calls to mind another thing I was impressed with in your book, Stu, is you've got a lot of references to well-known and classic chess books. I mean, obviously, to get to your level as a kid, I'm sure you were reading your fair share of books. But even beyond that, more recent books by I know you've met and are a big fan of John Nunn's and Jenna Sosonko, and so was all of this reading sort of in conjunction with the book project, or have you just been reading about chess all along?
Well, I read a ton when I was a player, and then I got back into it, 10 years ago when I started, writing the book.
Okay, yeah, and for listeners, there's a lot of great chess in the book, and also at the end, you give a long list of book recommendations, so we don't have to belabor the point, but if you were to pick one or two, Stu, what would be your desert island chess books?
Oh, well, I'm glad I have a copy of my own book here, so I can. Okay. Well, I wanted to say that Andy Soltis's recent book, Tall, Petrosian, Spassky, and Korchnoi, is one of the greatest chess books ever written. I think I would take a book of Tall's for the Desert Island, maybe Life and Games.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tall, he's a fellow who never edited a sentence in his entire life. And so, as a writer, there's plenty to criticize, but it just doesn't matter because he has such a great personality, and you feel like he's talking right to you. Let's see. John Nunn's book, Secrets of Practical Chess, I think is maybe pound for pound the best instructive book I've read. Nunn is he's such a good writer, and he has such a deep understanding of chess. He's number 10 in the world, and he's written deeply on so many subjects. Let's see. Fisher's book you mentioned. Oh, what can I tell you, Ben? There's lots of good stuff out there.
Yeah, and again, we've got to leave something for the listeners to actually go buy your book. I can't recommend it highly enough. And you also have a little compendium of chess advice, sort of principles of play. I don't know if you've been sort of up on this debate, but there's mixed opinions amongst the sort of chess writers and chess players about how useful rules of thumb are. What do you think?
Well, I think they're very helpful, but they have to be learned alongside concrete positions. I'd make an analogy that the way that people learn science is not through memorizing definitions or formulas. It's through applying concepts to the real world, and sort of that's how your brain learns them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I had a chess author on. I don't know if you've had a chance in all of your reading to read. I am Willie Hendrick. He wrote a book called Move First, Think Later, where that was sort of the idea that he espoused, that you need to have, it's really the chess that you remember, not the words.
Well, yeah, although like in writing this book, I realized that there's a thought I should have had many, many times as a player, and for some reason I don't think I did. And that is when you have the ability to swap pieces, ask yourself, which piece is better, my piece or my opponent's piece? You know, whose rook is more active? You know, whose bishop has more potential? And that seems like it's just common sense, right? You're going to swap pieces, so that's the question. Who's got the better piece? I think it would have helped me if I'd thought about that question explicitly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And hearing you talk about that makes me wonder, of course, you reference your trainer, Boris Kogan, many times in the book. And you generally speak pretty highly of him. Mm-hmm. But one thing you don't talk about that much is what you guys actually did. So what was his approach as a teacher? What were your learning methods?
Yeah, so he did two things. First, the deep analysis of my games, and then secondly, he had his own personal notebooks. He had a notebook with combinations and a notebook with in-game studies. And if I may say so, he stopped showing me the combinations because I was too good at them. But then the in-game studies I almost never could solve. It's hard to convey, but like when I was working with Boris, especially when I was first working with him, I felt like he was as good as a world champion because I had never encountered this kind of subtle understanding of position evaluation. And so this is something that I really could not have gotten out of a book. And you know, I say at one point in the book that because of Boris, I eventually became a weak, strong player. But if I hadn't worked with him, I would only have become a dangerous potser. It's like I would have gotten very good at kind of a crude version of thinking about chess. It's really, really. Okay, I'll tell you just one quick story. So I had a short draw with Lev Albert in the last round of the 1987 U.S. Open. And I hit the black pieces. It was a Catalan. And then, you know, when Boris and I looked at this game, Boris said, well, of course, you're a little worse in this position. And I said, well, I don't think so. You know, I think I'm completely equal. And so Boris and I then played it out. And eventually he won my pawn on B as in Boris 4, which he had told me could eventually become a weakness. Then we played it out again, and he again won that pawn in about 30 moves. And having done that, I now looked at the original final position, and I saw it as better for white. I saw that pawn as a weakness, and you know I had no clue that it was a weakness before.
That's pretty interesting. And were you able to extrapolate that to other positions, or was that just sort of, it just gave you a better understanding of that one Catalan position?
You know, you can't extrapolate other positions, but it's a complete mystery as far as I know how the brain does this. One of your excellent listeners and benefactors asked me about the role of calculation in with strong players' play. And I was thinking about that, and calculation is important. Lots of things are important, but really judgment is more important. Even with the engines, what they do is more judgment than calculation. I mean, it sounds like a strange thing to say, but if Ribka looks at a billion positions or 100 million variations, very few of them are going to end in checkmate. And so all the other variations, they have to have an evaluation attached to the end. And so evaluating positions and then just sort of coming up with good candidate moves. And the way you do this is that, like, you find them in your brain, but you have no idea how they got there. I always found improving at chess to be a mystery because I never got the same positions that I saw in magazines and books. And I just kind of figured, well, I'm growing up and my brain is developing, and so I'm getting better at chess, but I never understood how it happened.
Yeah, well, you were pretty immersed in it seems.
Yeah, I would have had a much different experience, not only if the internet had existed when I was a kid, but also the ability to look at chess books, digitally.
Yeah.
I still read paper, but it's clear to me that digital is the right way to read them. I never read chess books seriously because I would never get out of bored. So I just open up books, I'd look at a diagram, follow the moves for as long as I could or wanted to, and then look at some other diagram. So to actually see the moves being played on a board, it's not bad.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated reading your book, that it was on Forward Chess rather than Kindle, because sometimes I use both. But your book was meaty enough. The calculation that you referenced was significant enough that I was glad to be able to play through the moves. Oh,
yeah. Just thank you, the New in Chess Press. They did a great job.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the question from Jeff Anderson, the only question from my Patreon supporters that we had not gotten to yet. So one of them was just, Jeff, as you mentioned, had said that he thinks one of the things that sets elite players apart is calculation. But he also says he seems to remember a story about a car trip once when you were a kid where you surprised the occupants with your chess visualization skill. Do you know what Jeff is referring to there?
Yes, and I am bewildered as to how he knows that. Do I know Jeff?
Well, I think he's around. I think he's around your age, so he may have heard. I mean, probably. I would guess you're 1 degree apart at most.
This is a story from 1978. It's before I had ever played a rated chess game. But my family was hosting Larry Christensen, who was doing a simul tour, a Church's Fried Chicken tour around the U.S. Christensen was about 22 years old, and we were just in the car coming back from dinner, and Christensen said he'd won a very short game, checkmated in a very short number of moves in his previous simul. And so he told us the game. He was white. It was E4, G6, B4, Bishop G7, Knight C3, Knight F3, D6, Bishop C4, and now the guy played, Knight D7, and so white plays Bishop takes F7 check, King takes F7, Knight G5 check. Now the guy moved his King forward to F6 because otherwise Knight E6 will win his queen, and then after King F6, Queen F3 is mate, and I was barely 9 years old, and he probably never used a chess clock and didn't have a rating. And I said, oh, nice game. And my father said, well, son, you shouldn't pretend, blah, 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 blah. And then I repeated back the moves to the game. Now, I wonder if I really did it correctly. If you're in that situation and you get some of the moves right, people start, applauding you maybe before you've done everything. But I'm pretty sure that's the story he was referring to.
Wow, that's impressive. And was this in algebraic or descriptive? Do you remember the story, or have you just remember being told it later? Do you remember
Oh, no,
when it
no.
happened?
This one I remember, although I don't remember whether I believed I had gotten all the moves right. But he definitely told it in descriptive, because I remember him sort of having to sort of think a little harder as he was saying
Right.
pawn to king four, pawn to king four. I asked Christensen about this a few years later, and unfortunately he didn't remember meeting me or my family at all, but I sure remembered him.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I just have one more question for you, Stuart, which is, so you're sort of in a unique club of top players who've retired. I mean, some better known than others, but for some reason I feel like your name gets mentioned a fair amount. And of course, there's been others. We mentioned Tal Shaked, Josh Waitzkin, and then from your generation, Patrick Wolff, David Norwood, who you singled out as an amazing calculator. Are you in touch with any of those people? Like, how do you maintain friendships with people, whether they be retired from chess like you or still active?
Some people. I would like to be in touch with more people than I am. Ben Finegold, you mentioned, we're still good friends. Adam Leaf, I'm in touch with some. Andrew Metrick, I'm in touch with some. But yeah, I'd like to have a reunion sometime.
Yeah, I'm sure that would be a lot of fun for you.
Let me, if I may indulge myself, just to say something to your listeners.
Sure.
I can tell them one thing about this book, which is I worked really hard on it.
It's evident. Yeah.
I would almost be embarrassed to say how many drafts probably every single page of the book went through. And then when I was finally almost done with it, I had to cut about 150 pages, which almost always makes a book better.
Yeah, but it's still hard to do, right?
But anyway, it was such a joy writing this book. I'm so glad maybe someone will read it now or read some of it.
Yeah, and your joy shines through. I mean, it's a pretty funny book. You've got some good one-liners in there, and the chess is significant. I like the line where you're talking about classical chess, and you say, and this game was classical chess, or as we used to call it, chess.
That's right. Yes, I'm still a believer that slow time controls are the best measure of one's strength.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Everything's speeding up so much, but with the World Championship in particular, it would be hard for me to give that up. I mean, I love the drama of the matches.
Oh no! The fact is, I do as well as a fan. The only thing that bothers me about chess right now is the damn Berlin Ruy Lopez.
Yeah.
I really think that someone has made a good suggestion that maybe one rule of chess should be changed, like when you castle, that you can move your rook over if the squares are vacant. So in the Ruy Lopez with white castles, his rook can be on e1. So damn it, black cannot play knight takes e4.
That's funny. I mean, a lot of people have started playing d3 against it now, so it at least doesn't go to the Berlin endgame. But yeah, it's doesn't lead to the most fiery positions even then.
No, what Joel Benjamin said to me, another person I keep in touch with some, Joel said, yeah, nowadays players play d4 when they play for a win and e4 when they play for a draw, or when they're playing it safe. And I'm like, oh God, this is so totally backwards.
Yeah, things have changed. Well, Stuart, again, I recommend your book wholeheartedly for anyone listening and thinking about getting it. I think New in Chess also has a free excerpt on their website that listeners can check out. So do you like to share your contact information, or would you rather keep that private, Stu?
No, I don't mind sharing it. My the email address that I check is my first and last name at hotmail.com. And this is basically an email account I have because I got it in 1998 and never changed it. But there you go.
Okay, yeah, and I'll link to the email address But yeah, hopefully, maybe a couple of the people you mentioned that you'd like to hear from will be able to track you down. I mean, certainly it's not so hard with this book. So you mentioned your other projects. So do you think you have another chess book in you in another 10 years, Stu?
Oh yeah, it'll be faster than that. I'm writing a book on fortresses now because I don't think this book has been written. I mean, it's not going to be as personal and as wide ranging as my current book, but I'll try to do a competent job.
That's great. Yeah, that does strike me as a good topic, and certainly I'll look forward to that one, having enjoyed this one so much. So anything else, Stu, before we let you go?
I just really enjoyed talking to Ben. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much, and thanks for this great book. Again, as I mentioned to you before, it's my favorite kind of chess book, so it was a real pleasure to read.
All right. Well, don't forget to write me an Amazon review now.
Yeah, I'll do that. I always this is a bit of an aside, but I always feel like a bit of an imposter when I didn't get it from Amazon. I always like to be a verified purchase, which unfortunately, since I bought on Forward Chess, I won't necessarily be, but I will gladly write you a glowing review.
All right. Take care, Ben.
Okay, Stu. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. Special thanks, as always, to my producer, Matthew Passy, and thanks to those who continue to help spread the word about Perpetual Chess. Positive reviews on podcast platforms and YouTube help people discover the show, as does telling a friend or sharing it on social media. Speaking of which, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at BennyFishel1, or join the Perpetual Chess Facebook group and continue the conversation about the latest interview. But most of all, of course, I want to thank those who provide financial support to the show, especially right now with so much disruption going on in the world. Most of all, I want to thank Chessable for sponsoring the show, and to everyone who kicks in via PayPal or the Perpetual Chess Patreon page to help sustain and improve Perpetual Chess. And without further ado, I would like to give special thanks to the following people and entities: Chessable, Quality Chess Books, the Capital City Chess Club, a Prentice Twitch channel, Andrew Al-Harjri, Andrew Bach, Austin Clough, Benjamin Porteau, Bill Sigler, Kathy Carr, Chad Oliver, Chris Flanagan, Dan O'Hanlon, Danny Davidson, David Shriver. I am Dimitri Schneider. I am Eric Rosen. Firas Sawaf, Gary Foreman, Greg Natel, Greg Shahadi, Guven Manet, James Kennedy, Jen Scream, John Jernigan, John Rockefeller, John Cromarty, John MacArthur, Kelly Palmer, Kevin O'Callahan, Lucio Casada Silva, the law offices of Stuart Katz, Michael Kahn, FM Michael Oblin, Mike Zelazny, Moonmaster 9000, you recently stopped your pledge, but Perpetual Chess will always love you. The famous Mr. Dodgy, Peter Zhody, Reuven Fisher, Seattle Chess Club, Thomas Stonix, Thomas Tachenko, Todd Bryan of Strong Chess, Todd Kennedy, and I also would like to thank the following people: Aaron Waffler, Ace Vallega, Adam Ralph of ChessEngland.com, Adrian Gutierrez, Alex Pejas, FM Andre Terakov, Dr. Andrew Perry, Aniti Deer, Better Chess Training, Bill Juniper, Bill Moran, Brad and Andy Rosen, Brett Howard Lynn, Brian Mullis, Chad Hilton, Dr. Charles Snodgrass, Chris Wainscott, Christopher Baumgartner, Christopher Chabris, Chris Lott, Christopher Wood. I am Christoph Zalecki, aka Chess Explained, Coach J's Chess Academy, Costa Carras, Courtney Fry, Craig Mallon, Daniel Gell, Daniel Ginsberg, Daniel Lucas of US Chess, Daniel Naylor, Dave Saylor, David Bleskacek, David Cramley of Chessable.com, Dalen Shelton, Dirk Decker, Dwayne Edmonds, Ed Daly, Ethan Smith, Ian Mason, I Am Elect, Donnie Ariel, or possible not I Am Elect, Fox Valley Chess Club, Francis Letarte Lavoie, Frank Tortoris MD, Gary Andrews, Gary Lewis, Geert Vanderveld, Gerard Barter, Giovanni Russo, Greg Harfst, Han Schut, Harish Srinivasan, Jacob Kovac, Jacques Pari, James Aspinwall, James Banastia, James Murr, Jason Woolham, Jaydeep Chakrabarty, Jeff Anderson, Jeffrey Martello, Yep Holland, Jerry Wells, Jim Ratliff, JJ Schnod, Dr. John Fallon, John Fernandez, John Fontaine, John Hartman, John Jeffrey, John McMurtry, Jonathan Slater, Jordan Goodwin, Jose Rodriguez, Justin Gardner, Jen Shahadi, Joe Rocky, John Thompson, Grandmaster Josh Friedel, I am Kare Christensen, WGM Katerina Nemtsova, Kelly Palmer, I am Kostya Kovyutsky, Krishna Kapala Krishnan, Kyle McAvoy, Larry Ryforth, Laura Belyavsky, Martin Knudsen, Martin Krug, Matthew Passy, Matthew Tedesco of SeattleChessMeetup.org, the Mechanics Institute Chess Club of San Francisco, Michael Allard, Miguel Aristide, Mike Clem, Mr. Mike Shahadi, Mitchell Fabian, Nate Solin, Neil Bruce, Negmat Malajanov, Olaf Mueller-Michaels, GM Pascal, Charbonneau, Pasi Passanen, Paul Bain, Paul Clarkson, Paul Sweeney, Paulo Santana, Peter Lux, Randall Temple, Ricky Grijalva, Richard Hollenbuck, Robert Turner, Roy Yearwood, Ryan Berg, the Say Chess YouTube channel, Scott Doherty, Scott McKinnon, Sebastian Finsterwalder, Stefan Roller, WGM Tatyev Abrahamian, Tim Brennan of TacticsTime.com, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Tom Edsel, Tamaz Komanich, Tony Rotella, Tyron Price, Vishnu Srikumar, Wayne Beam, William Brock, William Juniper, William Hogarth, William Peterson, FM Zhao Cheng of Chess1000.com, and last but never least, Zhivko Stoyanov. Thanks for listening, everyone. Catch you guys soon.